Well, welcome everybody. I can go ahead and get us started. My name is Sam Geary. I'm the Director of College Access and Completion for Breakthrough San Juan Capistrano. We're a college access program down in South Orange County. So our goal is to serve students from underrepresented backgrounds in higher ed from middle school until they graduate from college. I specifically work with our 11th graders and then our college students until they graduate. So college application season and the college application process is my job. And then I'll let Ray introduce himself too.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Ray Cano. Currently, I am working with Breakthrough as a family engagement intern during my freshman year of college at USC. And something that I've been helping Breakthrough out is facilitate meetings for undocumented students in the community, specifically with Chirla. And so we've been doing a partnership, and I've been holding meetings to help out and spread information.
Awesome. So before we get started, kind of to kick us off, we wanted to do a little poll just to kind of get a sense of where you all are as far as with information around this topic, around college admissions for undocumented students, students with DACA, or students from mixed status families. And, you know, feel free, there's one question kind of asking about what area you're most interested in, whether that's for DACA or undocumented students or students from mixed status families. Feel free to answer whatever you feel comfortable with, but we'll use this information to help us with the rest of the session to make sure we're touching on the stuff that's most of interest to you. So we can go ahead and launch the poll.
So for students who are just joining us, we are answering our first poll question to kind of get an understanding of what you all understand. And the question is, students who are undocumented or have DACA can receive financial aid, true or false? Go ahead and answer what you believe. And then if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please utilize our Q&A feature. It is located at the bottom next to participants.
Okay, so for that question, I think everyone can see the results, I'm pretty sure. Yes? Yes. Okay. So 84% of us think that students who are undocumented or have DACA can receive financial aid for college. 16% think it's false. So we'll find out the answer to that today. We can go ahead and check out the next poll question. It is unsafe for students or parents or guardians with DACA or who are undocumented to share this information with the colleges they are applying to. So true if you think it's unsafe to do this, false if you think it is not unsafe. All right, so 10% think it's true that it's unsafe to do this. 90% think it's false. Interesting. All right, let's see what the next question is. Okay, many colleges provide resources for undocumented and DACA students and family members, including free legal support. Is this true or is this false? (93% true, 7% false. Wow, okay. Let's see the next one. Okay, private colleges always treat undocumented and DACA students as international applicants instead of domestic applicants and do not provide financial aid for these students. Okay, this one's a bit more split. So some folks think that this is true. A few more of us think that this is false. And we'll answer this, like I said, later on in the presentation too. Okay, and then which topic are you most interested in learning about today as it relates to DACA students, undocumented students, and students from mixed status families? So the options are the college search and application process, the financial aid application and verification processes, resources for college students from immigrant backgrounds, or long-term planning for careers and future degrees. All right, so we're kind of split with the largest number being resources for college students from immigrant backgrounds. Cool. All right, and I think there's one more question. Okay, so I'm most interested in learning about the application process for DACA students, undocumented students, or students from mixed status families. And when we say mixed status families, we mean students from families who have some family members who are undocumented or have DACA status, and some family members who are not, who are US citizens or lawful permanent residents. All right, so still kind of split here, but mostly for undocumented students and students from mixed status families. Well, you're in luck because we're going to cover all of this that we talked about in the poll, but thank you for doing that. That's helpful for Ray and for myself as we kind of move along in this presentation to make sure it's as useful for you as possible. All right, so Ray, are you going to do the agenda, I think?
Yeah, I'll do the agenda. All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to go over our purpose and objective, and then we're going to go over college search and application process, financial aid application and verification processes, resources for college students from immigrant backgrounds on and off campus, long-term planning for careers and future degrees, and then we are going to have some time for the Q&A.
Awesome, thank you, Ray. All right, so the reason we're here today and sort of the purpose of this presentation, why Ray and I wanted to be here, is because we know that applying to college is complicated, it can be confusing, overwhelming, you can have all of those feelings. Of course, it's also exciting and a really awesome thing too, but we know it can be complicated. And when you add being undocumented or having DACA or coming from a mixed status family, this can become even more complex. And a lot of this information exists in multiple places, but sometimes it's difficult to find it all in one cohesive space. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that you all have sort of like a bird's eye view of what the process looks like. Because when you have the information ahead of time, it makes it easier for you to really take advantage of your college admissions process and make sure that you're making strategic and informed decisions. So today, we hope that by the end of this, that you as participants will be able to explain how your immigration status or the immigration status of folks or their families could impact their admissions or financial aid processes, and then also be able to identify strategies to help you navigate this process. So we'll also hope that by the end of this, you'll be able to identify and access a lot of resources that are available to support students from immigrant backgrounds as they apply to college. And kind of leave knowing where to go to find this support. So that's what we're here to do today. And I'm going to turn it over to Ray to start us off with the college search and application process.
Okay. So first of all, it's a college search and application process. Important factors to consider for students who are undocumented or have DACA is the location. So primarily, we know that California is great with undocumented students and DACA and financial aid. So I'm going to go over how location can differ in that. I'm going to go over the type of colleges, private universities, how they can have different policies for undocumented students, and specifically colleges in California and how they can be different too. Going to go over resources for undocumented students and how that can vary in different colleges and what that means in your college search too. Okay, so first of all, location. California specifically has the California Dream Act, which allows undocumented students and students with DACA to receive financial aid. So it is a great resource that is, unique to California. Um, so undocumented students with DACA in California might find complications traveling to another state. So even with the DACA or being undocumented, it's hard to travel within the United States, especially through flights and everything like that. It is always less risky to stay in California than to, let's say, go on a flight or go to San Diego and cross a checkpoint. There's always complications that can occur. And so it's safest for students with that background who are with on DACA or undocumented to always keep that in mind. And so different states have different policies around admission and financial aid for undocumented students, meaning you might not find the same amount of help that you find in California in other states, or, there are some colleges that only accept a number of undocumented students, even in California. So that's an important factor to consider too. And like I said, it's important that checkpoints, the most prominent checkpoint in California right now is San Diego. So even if you are of mixed status family, remember that that means that your parents might not be able to visit you, and so you'll have to go visit them. Or that just means that if you're undocumented, you might find some complications when going to college there, let's say for San Diego State or UCSD. And so let's go over the type of colleges. So you have your California public schools, the Cal States, the UCs, and the community colleges. So those are really friendly in California for undocumented students and students on DACA. So you'll be able to receive financial aid from the institution, and you'll be able to apply. So there's no problem there. There is differing when it comes to private and out-of-state public universities. So undocumented and DACA students are typically eligible for admission, but financial aid access will vary. There are specific colleges that give 100% need met for in California. So one of the examples is USC, the school that I am attending, SoCA, Pomona, Stanford, Occidental College. But it really just does depend on the school, and it is really important to look into what the different school policies are. And out of state, they also have different policies. So it's really important when you're researching that you look through financial aid, especially if that's going to be a problem for you or is going to depend on where you go. And so resources are really important to look into too. So I think my main emphasis for this is, always do research on the school that you're going to, especially if you're undocumented and you would like some support. So you should look into legal advice/services. Specifically at USC, we have the law school that helps out with cases and services. There is the social working school that has a fund for DACA renewals and or visa renewals. So, that's important to look into if that's your situation. There's a lot of resources to be found in universities and colleges. So again, like I said, research and research. Support groups, groups around campus who maybe there's a large immigrant or ethnic or undocumented population, and there's groups for support, and you can meet people with the same background. That's really important to look into too. And then counseling. So what I mean by counseling is when you're applying to a college or you're renewing your financial aid every year, there are a lot of colleges that might not have a lot of undocumented students and might not have a lot of experience. So whenever you're applying and you find any complications or anything and you call the school and they might not have a clear answer, maybe, look into if they have background with that, or if they have a special person who helps with undocumented students or students with a mixed family background. That is really important. And again, with all of this, you are going to have to be looking into your colleges every time you look into it. So it's really important as an undocumented student or a student who has DACA to, find what fits best for you and what will support you throughout your 4 years or more in college. And so application processes for the UCs, CSUs, and Common Apps here in California, it's typically almost the same. There are some factors that are different though. So Social security number. So if you're undocumented, you might not have a social security number, but if you are from a mixed family background or your parents might fill out taxes, you might have something called an ITIN, which your parents put you in their taxes, which you can use to put into your application. And so people with DACA have a social security number, they could use that too. And, that's something that's going to differ from you and the regular person. Not regular, I mean, somebody who has citizenship and status here. So then we go into residency and legal status. So if you've attended high school in the US for 3 years, technically, you are a resident of California. So every time like they ask for residency, you'd say California. In terms of legal status, then there is, the permanent residency and the citizenship status. And when it asks for citizenship in the UCs or CSUs or Common Apps, there is also an option to say like non-US citizenship. So you don't have to say specifically where you're from or, where you were born. So that's important to know. And so financial aid is going to be done through the California DREAM Act application, specifically if you're undocumented or have DACA. Okay, so financial aid and verification process comes next. So the California DREAM Act has already opened. It opened October 1st. And important thing is to know is that you'll need your parents' taxes on hand when you complete it, and March 2nd is a priority deadline to submit the DREAM Act application, and so you will also be considered for Cal grants. So it's important to keep those dates in mind. Those are important, and start as fast as you can if you have, if you're going to apply through DREAM Act. And so the application, so here's the website is DREAM. You can search up DREAM Act on Google and find the official website. And so here is a little example of what the application looks like. And it's actually really user-friendly, and every box that you click, you'll actually find tips on the side. So it's not going to be very hard to know what you need to fill in there. So again, like I said, you need to have your parents' taxes at hand if they file taxes. Know your ITIN or DACA social security number. And if you don't have one, you'll just enter zeros specifically in this application. And so the important next step when filing the DREAM Act is going to be, if you are male, then you must mail in a selective service registration form to be eligible for financial aid. So it is really important to not forget this step. If you are male, you do need to find this form. It's going to be on their website too. And then you would be mailing it by mail to Selective Services. And just for the end of this, if you have any questions for when completing it, or if something isn't clear, here's a phone number for the assistance hotline. So if you guys ever need anything, don't forget that hotline is there. And if you find any troubles or you don't know much how to fill something out, they have a lot of experience with different situations, with different types of families and different types of statuses. So they'll be really helpful in giving you advice and helping you through the process.
Ray and Sam, we do have a couple questions relating to the California DREAM Act. I guess we could start off by our first question is the DREAM Act a lot of help, enough if one wants to attend a private university? So I'm assuming this is asking, is it sufficient amount of financial help if you would like to attend a private university? That'll be your first question.
I can answer it. Thank you. And thanks, Ray, for that. And before I answer this, I meant to mention this at the beginning, but I want to acknowledge that I'm a white woman. I don't come from an immigrant background, and I'm not a first-time college student. So a lot of these experiences are not necessarily personal to me, but things that I have experienced over the years that I've worked with students. So I just want to put that out there. I'm also not an immigration attorney. So, if you've been listening thus far and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know if I fit into this category or this box that Ray and I are mentioning, maybe you have TPS, temporary protective status, or you have a U visa, or you didn't go to high school in California for 3 years, but you're still think you're a resident. there are a lot of other ways to access these things. We're talking kind of broadly from sort of a higher up view. And when we get to the resources section, I will like kind of direct you to some places where I really encourage you to ask more specific questions as they relate to you. But for the DREAM Act question, on the slide where we listed all of the California private colleges that meet 100% full need, this question, as far as private colleges and financial aid for undocumented students, I'm going to speak specifically to California because right now, given the current state of like immigration law and just safety for folks, for many folks, that's going to be the option, especially if you're a high school senior, you're more than likely going to be undocumented and not have DACA, which of course makes it more dangerous to fly and things like that. So if in California, there are several private colleges that pledge to meet 100% full demonstrated financial need. So after you fill out your California DREAM Act, if your family can pay $100, the college will pay 100% of the rest of the cost for you in whatever combination of grants, loans, whatever they do. And I think this can go down a rabbit hole for financial aid. But what's important to know is for students filing the DREAM Act, what you need to do is I suggest like Googling a college's name and financial aid undocumented students. And if they meet 100% need for undocumented or DACA students, they're probably going to publicize it because that's something to be really proud of. So schools like USC, if you Google that, it immediately comes up. Like USC meets 100% of demonstrated financial need for undocumented students or students with DACA who are admitted to our school. Whereas, for example, I was searching Scripps College earlier and it was really hard for me to find it. So I think they may offer it for like a handful of students, but not 100%. So it really varies from school to school. You can either like research directly on their website. You can also search, like I think College Greenlight has a list of colleges that meet 100% of demonstrated financial need, and they'll include whether or not they do that for DACA and undocumented students. And you can also call the financial aid office directly. Like that's your right as somebody applying to college to ask. And if they can't answer, that might be kind of a flag for you. But the ones on that slide that did not have asterisks, those are across the board. If you get in, you're getting your full financial need met. The other colleges with asterisks, they might have a limited amount of funding or only like one scholarship per year. So yeah, that's the long answer to that one. Michael, are there any other questions you wanted me to answer right now?
I think one of our students wanted to know about DACA, but I think we're going to address that a little bit later, right? In terms of how all of these come together in terms of paying for college. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, just for folks if there are folks in the room who don't know what DACA is, it's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. So essentially provides protection, like legal protection for undocumented folks who applied to this program. And it is renewable over time and also allows the ability to work. So it was for like a specific group of folks who were like here during a specific amount of years and like age. There are different requirements. But, you know, as immigration policy has changed, the presidential administration has changed. They no longer accept current applicants. So folks can't apply right now unless something changes for DACA. But that's what it is. And usually, I think 2 years ago was the last year I had folks who had DACA that I worked with, just because they've kind of aged out. Cool. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can move along with the FAFSA. So this is not going to apply to you if you're undocumented or if you have DACA for the most part. There may be some like extenuating circumstance that I'm not aware of, which is why it's good to talk to an immigration attorney. But mostly this will be for students who themselves are US citizens or lawful permanent residents, but have one or more parent or guardian who is undocumented or has DACA. So essentially someone who doesn't have a social security number. So when you apply for the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. And this is just very high level. There's a lot more to be aware of for the FAFSA, but this is specifically if you come from a mixed status family. So if this is your case, for the social security number section, if your parent uses ITIN to file taxes, which is just a number, and you can Google that to learn more about it. It starts with a certain number, I can't remember. I think it starts with a 6, but I could be wrong. If they use ITIN, or if they have like a social security number from a previous like work authorization that's no longer valid, or if they have DACA and they have their DACA social security number, for the most part, like you shouldn't put those. If you have like a special circumstance where you think they might have an active social security number that they use to file taxes, that's when you can communicate with the FAFSA or a financial aid office to be sure. But typically you'll put zeros for their social security number. So you just enter all zeros for any parent or guardian with this case. And they're not going to be able to use this tool on the FAFSA called the IRS data retrieval tool, which really is just something that simplifies it. Basically, the FAFSA application talks to the IRS, which is like the tax organization, and they just like input your tax numbers, like in information from your tax documents, into the FAFSA, so you don't have to manually do that. But if your family filed with ITIN or something like that, you can't do it. And then whenever you have questions along the way, I really encourage you to call FAFSA, and especially if you're Spanish speaking or have a Spanish speaking family member, I would almost call the Spanish speaking line, just because there have been several times when I've called the English speaking line and gotten different answers every time to immigration related questions. In my experience, the folks on the Spanish speaking line tend to have a little bit more experience with questions related to immigration as it plays into the FAFSA. So when you actually submit the FAFSA and get to the final like check for errors portion, there is going to be something that will come up if you put zeros for either of your parent or guardian social security numbers. And it will look like this. This is somebody, I guess, on the internet took a picture, and so I'm grateful for them, and put this on so we can have a visual. But essentially it'll be like, error. You reported that your parents' social security numbers were zeros, but you also reported that they didn't file a foreign tax return. So it automatically triggers an error, which is frustrating because you'd think they would have figured it out by now. But what you have to do is click the blue check for errors button 3 times. So that has to happen 3 times in a row. So that one is right here. You have to click this 3 times and then it will let you through. So don't stop and give up at that point. And then when you get to the end, after you've done that and it's like, submit the FAFSA, if you have at least one parent or guardian who has a social security number, then you can sign it online, and that's easy. You just kind of put in their FSA ID information and go from there. If not, you need to sign it manually. So you will print something called a signature page, sign it, and mail it to the FAFSA in Kentucky. And I have a resource page after this that has the links to how to do that. But another note here is if your parent or guardian is undocumented and does not have a social security number, just like we talked about on the previous slide, they should not make an FSA ID. Awesome.
Sam,
questions?
there was a question relating to FAFSA. Would students entering all zeros for the social security number, would it have any effect on their parents in any way? I'm assuming a negative effect by reporting zeros.
That's a really good question, and that's one that a lot of students ask me. So like I said, I'm not an immigration attorney, so I will speak from my experience. And this will come into play. Like, I've gotten this question a lot, and I'm like, I can't answer it. Sometimes I call the FAFSA, they can't answer it. So what I've done is I've gone to some of the UC undocumented resource centers. So I've talked to UC Irvine, UC Riverside, and they told me that this will not impact families at all. So across the board, putting zeros won't impact it because there's something called FERPA, which is the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. So anything you put on here should not be released to any other organization. And so it shouldn't hurt anything to put zeros. But if you ever have a special concern about a family member, you can reach out to or talk to an immigration attorney. But in my experience, and from what I know, this is not an issue. Some folks have more questions down the line with what I'll talk about next, which is verification. But yeah, it shouldn't affect your family. It won't affect your family negatively in any way. Okay, so the last thing that to keep note of for FAFSA is there's something called the federal verification process. So basically, once you submit this application, it has all these numbers and your income information in it. Some people will get selected for verification. So basically they're like, send in some additional paperwork so we can make sure what you put in the application is correct, you didn't make any mistakes, and then we'll let you through and you'll get your financial aid. A lot of times kids from mixed status families will be selected for federal verification because you're manually entering this information. So they can't verify, oh, this was sent over from the IRS, so we know there's like no human error. They know that you typed it in, so it's likely that you'll be selected for verification. If you are, all you have to do is submit a couple of documents to them so they can go through and check through it and make sure it's good. This is where I've had more kids, actually, I kind of take back what I said previously. This is where some folks have had concerns, like, I'm afraid to turn in my actual taxes because I don't want the school to see like the specific social security number that my parent used to file taxes or something like that. And if that's your question, I would talk to the Undocumented Student Resource Center at the schools you're applying to, or at one of the schools you're applying to, because they can help work with financial aid to make sure that that's a safe situation for your family. For just the FAFSA application, zeros are fine. But when you're submitting documents, sometimes kids have concerns. What I suggest ahead of time is they're going to ask for something called the tax transcript. And what you do is you just go to the IRS website. It's linked in the resource page that I'll show at the end. And you can request a tax transcript by mail. So they will mail it to you. Unless one parent has social security numbers, then you can download it from the website. It takes like, 30 minutes or whatever. But if you do it via mail, it can take weeks. I've had kids request it like 9 times and not get it. So I highly encourage you to do this in the fall. Like if you are applying to the FAFSA, just while you're doing it, request that tax transcript, because as long as the taxes have been filed, you can request a tax transcript. It's free, and that gives you time, if you don't get it, to follow up and figure it out. If you really can't get it, like if your only option, if you can't get it through the mail and you need to go to like an IRS office and you don't feel safe doing that with your family, many colleges will allow you to just sign the copy of the 1040 tax forms and turn it into the school, to the financial aid office. So that's another option you can ask about if this is really not working for you. And we've had that before. We've had kids say like, I can't get it, Sam, and I'm not going to go to an IRS office and put my family in danger because we don't feel safe doing that. So that's another thing that the school can do. You just have to communicate with the financial aid office, and ideally with the undocumented student services folks there, because they can help sort of make that happen too. Awesome. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to add really quickly is on scholarships. The one thing to note about scholarships is not all scholarships will be available for undocumented students or students with DACA. In fact, some will be only available to undocumented students and students with DACA. So there are some like special scholarships, and then some scholarships that are available to all students regardless of status. So there's a great list on Immigrants Rising website, which I linked here and is also on the resource page, that you can check out that's updated each year with the scholarships available for undocumented students. And then a big one that's available and is partnered with some schools in California and throughout the country, including Cal State Long Beach, is the Dream.us scholarship. So that's a full ride scholarship for undocumented students. Oh, Michael, I don't know if you want to talk about the survey code.
Yes, students. So at this point, this would be a great time to take a screenshot, write it down, write it on your phone. This is going to be your survey code. So as you already are aware, you are eligible for some of our raffle prizes that we have for participation in Destination College. You will need this code to complete the survey and enter the raffle. So write it down. Today's raffle survey code is college. Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah. All right, so now I want to talk about resources. So like I said, Ray and I are here, but why are we here? We're not even immigration attorneys or even experts who work at colleges. Why would you trust us? Well, because we're going to direct you to all of the awesome resources that are out there. So the good thing is, especially in California, there's just so many supports available for undocumented students and students with DACA. And a lot of them are available to you before you're even in college. So actually the majority of them are. So this is something to start thinking about now, whether you're a senior and applying this fall, or if you're a community college student and transferring, or even if you're a younger student in high school. These are things you can be seeking out ahead of time. So I wanted to start with the UCs because all of their resources are kind of connected among all of the UC, University of California campuses. The cool thing about the UCs is they have really awesome legal services that are offered at every campus and are available not just for students, but also for family members. So if you have a sibling or a parent who would like to meet with an immigration attorney, that's something they can provide for free. But that is only available once you start at the school. So legal services can't be accessed until you actually like start your first day of class, but or it may be a little bit earlier depending on the college. And then they also offer awesome opportunities like scholarships. I know UC Irvine has a Dreamer Scholarship at their school that's available for kids to apply to. Some of them even have fellowships, so you can do like research, undergraduate paid research through their specific undocumented resource centers. They also have specific offices on campus. So I mentioned UC Riverside. Anna Correa runs undocumented student programs over there, and she's fantastic. And has a little office where you can go in and meet with her, obviously not during COVID, but other times. UC Irvine has the Dream Center, which is another space where undocumented students can go, get resources, meet with them, all of those things. And there are also a lot of clubs and organizations at each of these schools that you can check out. So the UCs across the board have a real wealth of resources, and they also have the UC Immigrant Legal Service Center, which is through UC Davis. So I have links to the big list of all the different programs. So if you're applying to UCLA, for example, like you could click on their link and try to get some more information. And like I said, you can start reaching out to their campus contacts now. As long as you don't need legal support, you can talk to those folks as early as now. The Cal States are similar. So they provide legal services, scholarships as well. They have their own campus support offices, which this over here is a screenshot of some of the different support offices that they have. And then they also have their own clubs and organizations in those spaces. So these are important to check out as well. And here's kind of a screenshot too of their legal support services. So they're available for free to Cal State students. I'm not sure if they're available to families. So that's the thing about the UCs that is pretty unique. And then community colleges really vary. So I encourage you to look into the specific two-year community college that you're considering or you're attending to see what they have. For example, close to us is Saddleback College, and they are partnered with CHIRLA, which Ray mentioned previously because he works closely with them, which is the Coalition for Humane Immigrants' Rights. And they're partnered with a lot of colleges to provide student legal services. So if you went to Saddleback, you'd go to CHIRLA, but if you went to Los Angeles Harbor College, you might get your support through the Dream Resource Center. So it really just varies. Something I suggest too is if you're a transfer student, as you're doing your college search process, I would approach it just like a kid who's applying directly to a four-year, in the sense that check out the different resources that are available, like Ray mentioned, at the schools you're interested in, because those you would also be able to access once you transfer. And then private colleges really vary. So this is kind of like the financial aid question. I highly encourage you to research this ahead of time and to also like see it as a little bit of a red flag if you can't find anything. For example, like this is a screenshot of what Pomona College has, and Ray mentioned all of the things that USC has, right? Like they have legal services, they have La Casa, which is a center for Latinx students as well as undocumented students, there's clubs, things like that. Whereas a school like University of Redlands doesn't have even like a first-gen center or an undocumented student center. So that can be more challenging, right, if you're an undocumented student and you don't have access to that support. So it's important to look out for what they have, but a lot of private colleges have really incredible resources and support available for students. Okay, so that was a lot. And the other thing I'll say before I transition into this part is I've included a couple more like external resources. So things like Immigrants Rising, CHIRLA, the Dream US, like a lot of things like that that are accessible for students, whether or not you're like specifically tied to a school. So you could check those out, especially if you need like specific legal support, but you can't access it yet at a college. But a lot of times the colleges can direct you to places where you can find it. The last thing I wanted to talk about is long-term planning for careers and future degrees. And this is something that we have lots of conversations with students about in our program, especially because we go through college graduation, and we know this is a concern for undocumented and students with DACA. So I don't want to go too in-depth here because I think this could be a whole nother presentation, just because every career path is very different. But I think what's important to know is that students can use the California DREAM Act to apply for financial aid, or DACA students can access a lot of these different post-professional degrees. So things like licenses in law, nursing, pharmacy, they can practice in the state of California. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of folks don't have DACA and are undocumented. So my advice is if you're interested in a specific field, like let's say you want to be a veterinarian or something, I would reach out to one of those centers that we just talked about to get more information. I stole this from the UC website. So maybe a good start would be to reach out to like UCLA if you're in the LA area, or UC Irvine, and their specific undocumented student services programs. And then students are also eligible for financial aid. So it says here, undocumented graduate students who have AB 540 status are eligible for all financial aid. AB 540 is basically the bill that encompasses Assembly Bill 540, which was the first kind of bill for financial aid, state financial aid access through the DREAM Act for students in California. So that's what Ray mentioned about going to high school for 3 years, but there are a lot of other ways to get that as well. So if you have that status, and you do if you have DACA or undocumented, you have access to financial aid for postgraduate degrees too. And they also mentioned fellowships. So if you're reading this and maybe discouraged if you don't have DACA, a lot of fellowships through universities and places in higher ed may be places to get kind of funding or even look for future careers. So like I said, I'm not exactly an expert here, but at the same time, I wanted to raise this subject because this may influence, you know, the careers you think about and even the colleges you're looking at based on the careers you're thinking about that might make sense for you. So yeah. So Ray and I made a little resource page. This is a screenshot of it, but essentially it has a lot of the links and some of the tips we talked about in this presentation. And I believe this presentation will be posted to YouTube in the coming days too. But also, if you have any questions and you don't really know who to ask, feel free to reach out to me. I may not know the direct answer, but I can probably connect you to folks who would have that answer. So I'm happy to field questions after this. That would be helpful. And that's my email. All right. So now we have time for questions for a few minutes. If any other folks have questions in the audience, or if Michael, if you've kind of got any queued up.
No questions so far, but students are asking in the chat, they're asking when the survey codes would be, not the survey code, the surveys will be sent out, and they will be sent out to students at the conclusion of Destination College. So stay tuned for those. They should be going out tomorrow. Tomorrow by Thursday, you should be receiving them. So hold on to the code, you'll apply that, and you'll be good to go. So yes, tomorrow night after the closing session. So hold on, if you haven't seen it yet, that's perfectly okay. But right now, if you have any questions about any of the topics that that were shared by Sam and Ray, this would be a great time to ask that.
Yeah, we can answer. I just saw someone ask to go back to the previous slide, and I'll type that into the chat. But yeah, if any folks have questions, we are happy to answer.
The presentation, the recording will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel, Fulfillment. I'll link that in the chat as well, so you all can find it. And it's going to also be found in our student resources link on our webpage. So I'll link both of those in the chat. But if you all have any specific questions, I encourage you all to ask those now. Take a minute, you know, maybe something that you want to review. This is the time to do so.
I see one in the chat that I can answer if that would be helpful. It says, is there a maximum amount the DREAM Act can give? That's a good question. So if you are undocumented or have DACA, you submit the California DREAM Act, you will be eligible for Cal Grants. So there are 3 different Cal Grants: Cal Grant A, Cal Grant B, Cal Grant C. Cal Grant A and B can be used at 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges as well, as long as they, like most colleges, there may be some like random colleges in California that don't accept it within California. And then there's Cal Grant C, which I believe is for associate's degrees. Yes. So those 3 exist, and then you can also be eligible for the DREAM loan. And then there's a new Cal Grant that's coming next year, I think, that is, I just read about it, but I can't remember all the details, but is connected to community service. So if you do a certain amount of community service hours per year, you could have access to that. This year for UC, Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B, which are pretty much the same, except Cal Grant B has like an opportunity grant that you get during your first year, and Cal Grant A requires a 3.0 GPA. Cal Grant B requires a 2.0, and the income is a little bit higher for Cal Grant A than for Cal Grant B is the cutoff. It's about $13,000 sort of for the UCs, $13,000, like 5,000, between 5,000 and 6,000 for the Cal States, I think 9,000 for private colleges, and I don't know specifically for two-year colleges, just because many of our students, but depending on their financial need, get that for free. But that's something that you can look up each year, the total Cal Grant amounts, and that's the maximum if your income is like the lowest. The other thing you can look into to see if you qualify is Google Cal Grant income ceiling. And if you do that, it will take you to this chart that will show like the amount of people in your family or in your household and your total income. So you can see if you qualify for the different Cal Grants. Okay.
So we have another question. Why should we put zeros for Social Security number instead of the ITIN number?
That's a good question. The reason you do that is because basically the FAFSA, all it's doing, this is for the FAFSA. I can't speak for the DREAM Act, but for the FAFSA, what it's doing is it will send like the number that you put in through its list of like the Social Security Administration, right? To just double check that it exists and it's correct. If you put an ITIN number or something, because that's not like a number registered with the Social Security Administration, it can just like mess up your FAFSA. I don't think, my understanding is it's not gonna like get you in trouble or anything, but more so we'll just like make it more complicated and you'll have to go in and change it. So the reason you do it is if it's not like a Social Security number for a lawful permanent resident or citizen, it will just like mess up your FAFSA and then you'll have to go in and change it. So that's why you put zeros.
Great questions. And a student, we typed in the answer, but they asked the FAFSA, the DREAM Act, are these applications one time of year? The answer is no. Every year that you are planning to go to college and seek financial assistance, you will be redoing a FAFSA or DREAM Act each year.
Yeah, and another random tidbit that might be helpful is a lot of folks who have parents or guardians who are undocumented or have DACA. It's common also for those folks to be like independent contractors, maybe like doing work for themselves. And sometimes that information doesn't get reported on taxes. What you need to know as a student is that anything that you like share with a financial aid office, they can follow up with you about that. So just make sure that if you're saying like, oh, like so-and-so didn't submit taxes, but they made like $600 like painting or something last year. If you send that to them, they could in theory ask you for your family to complete taxes. So I'm not saying don't do taxes and don't tell the truth, but I'm just saying keep that in mind. And maybe even like talk to somebody in one of the undocumented resource centers if you're having questions about what information to submit, just because they can give you counseling, whereas the financial aid office is going to be sort of required by law to ask for additional information.
I do want to be respectful of our presenters' time and then as well as our students, because I know some of you might have registered for a 5 o'clock webinar, and we are at 4:50 right now. So again, I would encourage you all, if you have any questions, if you want to send them privately, you can also do that as well. I want to thank Sam and Ray and Breakthrough for stopping by and sharing this really great information for students. It's important that we revisit this every year, because it's easy to think, oh, yes, I understand it. And then you're the senior now applying and it's like, wait, what did they say sophomore year? What did they say junior year? Right? And we forget these things.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We hope this is helpful. And even if you forget most of what we said, at least to like sort of have it a seed planted in your brain and places you can sort of go back to, because we know that it's a lot and it's complicated. And our goal is to just hopefully make it a little bit easier for you all as you apply.
Thank you. Thank you for the research page. This is definitely going to be shared with our students and have it accessible because if they haven't realized they need it now, they will soon. So we'll definitely share that with students.
Awesome. I see one more question. Do you want me to answer it quickly, Michael?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so it's asking, are there any other suggestions or tips for first gens with mixed status families? Something I would say that I see sometimes is sometimes I see our students from mixed status families maybe not feeling as comfortable or like the Dreamer resource centers are spaces for them too, when they really are. And that's been told to me verbatim by a lot of these people that run those spaces. So I would encourage you to get connected when you're applying to the different undocumented student resource centers at the schools you're applying to. And once you go to school, the same thing, just because, you know, even though this may not impact you personally in the sense that like you may not have the status, having a family member who's undocumented or has DACA is something central to your identity too, and you should be taking advantage of those resources. I think other than that, I would just also acknowledge that sometimes you all are sort of like the hidden group that doesn't get as much love, like and internet resource pages and things like that. And sometimes it's harder to find that information. So, you know, if you're ever having trouble figuring out what to do or how to file something specifically related to your family status, I would just reach out directly to a resource center because they're going to be the folks with the most experience. And sometimes it can be hard to find that information online or even to get the correct information when you're calling a specific application.